So today's gospel reading opens with this kind of neat visual. It takes place shortly after Jesus had healed a centurion's servant. So now he's enjoying some bit of notoriety, at least in Galilee. People are talking about what he did for the centurion's servant, and people are starting to listen even more closely. Now Jesus has taken his show on the road, and he and his followers are approaching the village of Nain, which is some 25 miles or so from Parkview. And the great visual that I talked about is this, because you have Jesus and his people, his disciples first, and then this multitude, we're told, of people that are following him. They're walking down the road toward Nain. And no doubt the crowd of people is buzzing. They've been listening to Jesus preach now probably for several days at least. Maybe even witnessed a healing or two. But we know, or we can guess at least, that this crowd following him was kind of a frothy and upbeat bunch of folks. They're charged up by Jesus, by being in his presence, and starting to hear this new gospel of hope and life and reconciliation. And they're all excited about what they've heard. And then they get close to Nain. And they run into the exact opposite, coming out of the town. Because they encounter a mother, a widow, who's just lost her only son. They encounter a large group of mourners. We can imagine the wailing and the weeping that's happening as they walk along. And some of these mourners are carrying the dead son on a kind of a stretcher called a bier. B-I-E-R. I know where your minds went. But they're carrying his body. And it's this heart-rending scene because he's wrapped up, in the grave clothes, and the people behind and in front are weeping, and the mother is inconsolable. So we have these two groups meeting. One is the personification of excitement and hope, and the other is the epitome of grief and hopelessness, and they meet, traveling from opposite poles. At least for the moment, they're coming from opposite worldviews. Like the sharks and the jets. Run into one another at the gates of Nain. And they're facing one another, and it's this awkward moment, you have to believe. That awkwardness that comes from witnessing grief when you're not really involved in it. You're witnessing something deep and heartfelt, and you're not part of it. And you feel like you shouldn't be there. And it's that awkwardness that comes when you're feeling pretty good about life in general, and then you're confronted by somebody whose world is crumbling around them. These groups meet on the road, and one is bringing something fresh and exciting into town, and the other is bringing death out. So it can be buried outside the walls. So these two groups meet, and there's this moment. And then something remarkable happens. The translation that I used said that Jesus looked on this woman and had compassion on her, on the widow. The Greek word that's used is blanchnizome, which is just fun to say. It's one of those words. Sounds like a Greek dish. I'll have some blanchnizome. But what it is, it's having compassion. Being moved with pity. And Jesus saw this woman, somehow knew she was a widow. And and knew the depths of her despair, and he felt compassion for her. And he looked at her in all of her grief and through all of her tears, and he says, "Don't cry. Don't cry." It's such a simple phrase, but it is so full of promise. It's so full of wonder. To look upon a woman in such grief and just say, "Don't cry." It's to say, you don't need to be crying. You don't need to be sad. Everything's going to be all right. Jesus makes that promise. Just those two words, "Don't cry." And in the next moment, Jesus approaches the group even closer, and he reaches out and he touches the bier where this dead young man is lying. And he says, "Young man, get up." Sounds crazy. And the crowd with Jesus, you can imagine those that were close enough anyway to hear what was happening, they must have gasped at this. Jesus, this guy they've been following, he walks up to a dead person and he says, "Get up." You have to imagine there was this moment of breaths being held, wait to see what would happen. Nobody really probably believed that this young man would get up. They all were uncertain enough to be curious. And in that moment, before anything else happened, after Jesus went up and kind of made this crazy statement, "Get up, young man," we can imagine that maybe some of the men and the mourners maybe started to push their way toward him to get him away from the body. Get him to stop making a spectacle out of this. And I can even imagine some people saying, "Just leave this woman alone. Can't you see she's been through enough?" And then the whole world was turned on its ear because the young man sat up. He not only sat up, he began to talk. And he not only began to talk, he began to prophesy. The Greek word that's sometimes translated as just speak, laleo. It can mean to just speak, but throughout most of the New Testament, that word is used when somebody is making an address, somebody is preaching on a topic. So chances are it was more than just simply sitting up and talking. He started to preach, to prophesy. And those who study first century Greek grammar point to the next sentence to support this interpretation, because it says that the people were gripped by fear and they glorified God, saying, "A great prophet has risen among us." And on first reading, it's common to assume that they're talking about Jesus. But from what I've read this week, the structure of the Greek grammar around it seems to point to the fact that they are talking about the prophet being brought back to life. Because the word arisen, they say a great prophet has arisen, that word, which I'm not even going to pronounce, carries a subtext of being raised from death when it's used elsewhere in the New Testament. seems to mean this person who has been raised up from death is a prophet. It's an amazing thing to think about. And it's all the more fascinating because if that is the case, which it seems to be, then this prophet, after this little scene outside the village of Nain, sort of kicked out of sight and you never hear from him again. And that's just one of those mysteries that we'll never understand, but it's interesting to ponder what this person went on to teach and what he went on to do. In fact, what was he saying when he woke up? When he came back? Was he talking about his experience, having been dead? That might be reason enough to hang a prophet on you. Or was there something even more? It would be neat to know. But we never will. And the passage closes with the note that the report of what happened spread throughout all of Judea and the surrounding area. And reading it today, 2,000 years later, we wonder if that was the point of this whole exercise. Was it just to give Jesus some more publicity? Was it just to get more people interested, or was there something more to it? If it was just marketing, I suppose that's reason enough. Because if anything, we've seen that the message of Jesus has not been enough on its own to get people's attention without having a miracle or two thrown in. 2,000 years ago, the people that Jesus was trying to reach out to didn't want to hear theology. They didn't want to hear what God's plans were. They wanted to see some fireworks. Kind of sounds like politics today. People don't want to hear about policy. They want to see some scrapping going on. So maybe that's it. Maybe it was marketing. Or maybe it was to raise up a prophet. But if that was the purpose, then why not focus more on the prophet? After reading, thinking, praying this week, I think it was maybe something a lot simpler than that. It wasn't marketing. It wasn't raising up a prophet. It was compassion. Jesus saw this woman about to bury her son. He saw this widow about to bury her only son. And those are key points, because if you put that in practical terms, Jesus saw this woman about to bury her only means of support. Jesus saw this woman about to bury the only spark of hope she had in her life. And it wasn't hope for advancement. It wasn't hope for something grand, of making it big. It was a simple hope for just staying alive, having a roof over her head and food in her stomach. And that hope had been snatched away. And Jesus saw this and he had compassion on it. It wasn't so much for the loss. People died every day. Jesus had to be very familiar with death. But the compassion he felt was for the hopelessness that had suddenly become part of her life. Jesus saw hope being carried out of town, ready to be buried. He saw it and he thought, I can do something about this. And then he did. I think that's what it's about. The lesson for us, the modeling that Jesus did for his disciples and that he does for us, Really doesn't get much simpler. It's simple and it's timeless. We are followers of Christ. That makes us messengers of hope, bearers of good news in this world. Since 9/11, we all have heard many, many times the different government agencies telling us, if you see something, say something. In today's gospel lesson, I think, there's a similar message for Christians. If you see something, do something. Because we are the messengers